All right, last week the stories from Tim Floyd were great on his time with Chicago and his relationship with Jerry Krause at the time. He followed up Phil Jackson as the Chicago Bulls head coach. He's back with us here on this Monday morning on Off the Bench, ESPN Radio, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Alexandria. Coach, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing fine, thank you.
Well, welcome back to the show. Last week, your stop by had everybody buzzing and looking for more information during that time during Chicago. And I had one question, Coach, that you laid out. It seemed like they had courted you for so long. When you got the job finally at the end of the '98 season, did you ever get an explanation, or were you surprised that they made you or forced you to keep the staff on from Phil Jackson?
No, I knew that that Jerry was going to have the influence on who I hired, and when you look back at the story last night, Jerry was responsible for bringing in Phil Jackson when Doug Collins was there. You know, Doug had some success, but he went out and took Phil out of the CBA. And so, you know, and I think that when you look at it, I don't know, you listened to that thing really closely last night, and they asked Doug Collins when he knew he was going to be fired. He said year two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when Phil came in. And you know, I don't know that you can understate the influence that Tex Winter had on Jerry Krause's decision making. Jerry was really proud that he had come up with a system of play. His owner wanted a system of play, Jerry Reinsdorf, because he was a Nick follower when they were winning with Jerry Lucas and Bill Bradley and DeBuscher and Willis Reed, and they moved the ball. There was player movement and ball movement, and it wasn't, you know, one guy dominating or high screen and roll, wing screen and roll. And Tex was brought in to help implement this system of play, and you heard Krause say that he thought he was the greatest coach that ever lived. Well, when Doug was running plays, and then he pushed Tex to the side, I think that's when Doug probably knew that he was not going to be there, and that Phil had embraced Tex. So Phil became the guy. You know, he always had a coach in waiting. I was a coach in waiting, and Phil was a coach in waiting, and Doug was a coach in waiting for Stan Albeck. And that's not something that people should knock Jerry Krause about. I think that, you know, every great athletic director probably always has a coach in waiting that he's thinking about down the road.
Coach, it seems, what is fair criticism for Jerry Krause? Because it seems like you know him more or better than a lot of people did. And he is obviously the villain in this documentary. But for me, it seems like, doesn't Reinsdorf deserve some type of criticism because he's the guy that's cutting the check?
Why would anybody criticize anybody? I mean, we're talking about the greatest team in professional sports through that time, up until probably New England now. Okay, that's been duplicated.
Yeah.
Why would anybody criticize them? You think about it. If Michael doesn't go and play baseball, they win 8 championships in a row.
Yeah.
And that was with free agency and everything else. And think about these things. Okay, if you're a player and you do not, you leave the contract negotiation, and all of a sudden you're finding out that you're undervalued, who do you take your resentment out on? The general manager.
Yeah.
Right.
And any, you know, Gar Forman's a friend of mine who was the general manager of the Bulls up until 2 weeks ago. And, you know, Joakim Noah probably didn't like Gar Forman because he signed him to a 5-year, $50 million deal, and 2 years later, he's runner-up MVP in the NBA. He probably left 60, 70, 80 million on the table. And so, you know, great organizations and great companies have convictions. And the Bulls' conviction was that we're not going to renegotiate contracts and that there's going to be protocol. There's an owner, and the GM reports to the owner. The coaches and scouts report to the GM. And in this case, there was probably I think that some of the things that drove it to the other side was that protocol was broken. Players' contracts maybe started being negotiated in the media through others, not through Jerry Krause and Reinsdorf I'm referring to. Last night they alluded to 25 things that came out in the media, and Phil, it was teased, I think, for next week. Phil was called into Jerry's office and had to talk about where these 25 things came from, and they were not in the leaks. Jerry Krause had a saying, and it was engraved on this board in his office. It said, "Loose lips sink ships." It came from World War II.
Yeah.
And they didn't want information coming from outside.
Yeah.
But when you look at Jerry, what he did is he brought in a system of play when he hired Tex Winter. He hired the first strength coach in the history of the NBA. He hired a team psychologist to deal with a strong personality that they had on the team, and y'all can figure out who that strong personality may have been that needed
the Heyoka.
Yeah. He was a great contract negotiator. Pippen was on a 7-year, $18 million deal, and Jerry Reinsdorf was quoted as saying, "I told him not to sign it." But when you signed a contract, you honored the contract, and then you have to sit there and say, okay, had they not had Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen on great contracts, would they have been able to bring in Tony Kukoc? Would they have been able to bring in Bill Cartwright? Would they have been able to bring in Ron Harper? Guys, some of these other players, the great bench players, Steve Kerr and Buechler, and guys that haven't been mentioned. They had great depth, and in the NBA you have to have a depth. That's the difference between the college game and the pro game, because it's 8 minutes longer, and you have a 24-second clock versus a 35-second clock. But the cheaper the contracts, the better the depth.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't acquiesce to the players, and that to me is a strength and not a weakness. Now, of course, this thing is being dictated, from a player's point of view and a coach's point of view. Okay, but you look at current teams that have blown up early. Okay, typically it's because the ownership acquiesced to a star player, and that star player said, "Okay, I want you to pay my buddy here a max contract, and I want you to bring in this player, and I want you to fire this coach, and I want you to fire this general manager." And then what happens? They leave and they go to another team anyway. Mm-hmm. So you get a short-term gain, but the long-term gain is not there. And so why is this documentary being written? It's because it's about a team that probably would have won 8 championships did Michael not play baseball. So is he getting unfairly criticized? Absolutely. Mm. And then when you look at, and my guess, and I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is that, Michael having become a general manager and Phil having become a general manager later, that they probably look back in retrospect and think, you know what, the guy probably did a pretty good job.
Huh.
I mean, that's
never
a really
even thought
good
about
point,
that. That is a great point.
Because both them did not.
And both of them tapped out.
Good job.
We're like
that old Knicks thing with Phil. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
We're talking to Tim Floyd here on Off the Bench. Coach, do you buy Isaiah Thomas's explanation on why they didn't shake the Bulls' hands after that game?
No, I don't. I don't. But let me tell you something. Michael, who's the toughest guy, and I mean, I sit there and look at that, and I think, what are these young players? Yeah. These guys that, when I take recruits out, we'd have dinner, and you're trying to come up with something to talk to a 17-year-old guy about at dinner, and so you talk about the greatest teams that ever played, the greatest decade that ever played, the greatest player that ever played, and it's all, LeBron. Mm-hmm. it's all, Durant. Great players, but, great players. But when they watch that, you have to see, the eye of the tiger, this ferocious competitor, this guy who, he was angry at teammates. He was angry at the world. He carried it on his shoulders, and it made him great. It made him so great. But I think he's the greatest that ever lived. And I remember being on a Nike trip in 1996. And this is 2 years before I went there, but knew that there was a chance, that I might want to do it or might do it, but I knew that I was going to have the opportunity. And there were, 50 coaches out in Hawaii and 4 or 5 players. And Michael had just won an NBA championship in June. He then went to play with the Olympic team, and that finished the end of July. This was 3 days later. He's out in Hawaii, and I'm going to play golf with a coaching buddy of mine at 6:30 in the morning. And I'm walking through the lobby, and I noticed, this workout room, and I thought, well, I may want to go in there later. So I stuck my head in there. Michael was lifting weights at 6:30 in the morning, and that night at dinner, my friend and I were sitting across from Michael. I wasn't having any conversations with him, and didn't say a word. But my friend asked him, said, Michael, I noticed you in the weight room this morning at 6:15, and you were playing golf that morning at 7:30. You just went through an NBA championship season and the Olympics where you win a gold medal. You'd think you'd need a break. And, and he just said, when you want to be the best in the world, you have to do more than everybody else in the world. Mm. And there's so many great, I think, lessons for young people that are watching this. I think things have changed so much since then. But I look at the fact that he, was 6-36 against the Pistons and averaged 32 points a game. But then they go to the triangle, and he has to share the ball and not be the man and not lead the league in scoring and average 37 or 38 a game. And they go 31-5 against the Pistons from that point on. Wow. And he only averages 28. How many players today would be willing to do that for a championship? He was influenced by getting beat by the Pistons, decided he had to get stronger. He knew that he couldn't get the ball in the lane because of the Jordan rules, that they were going to take him to the floor. So he became a guy that was willing to catch and kick because, it wasn't about followers, although he had more than anybody in the world. If we'd have had the internet, sure, and all that stuff, he had more. It was about winning, and he understood that winning created followers. And today it's, about guys posting this, posting that. And you asked the question about Isaiah. I don't think that really deep down bothered Michael. I really don't. The sportsmanship part of it. I mean, he killed teammates. He was so hard on them. Right. But I think what bothered him is that he shook their hand the time before. Right. But all this stuff today, where these guys are high-fiving and hugging and going out to dinner before ball games with the opponents and all that kind of thing, that didn't happen then. And I think fans find that refreshing. Fans aren't, following a person. They're following. They want to see their team win. And a lot comes from it. I took something from his mother, after he gets cut in high school. Well, today that kid would transfer to another high school. Yeah, it's got to be the coach's fault. Yeah, right. Sure. And his mother just said, "You got to go work harder." So he wouldn't work harder.
Coach Tim Floyd, every week at Following the Last Hit, man, this has been so
awesome.
Great. It's
this
so
is such
good.
A good treat. Yeah.
A great basketball coach and even a better storyteller on radio. We thank you so much for your time. We could do this not because we're out of content, just because this is so good at the stories. Thank you again for your time.
All right, guys, take care.